No, the thing is this, you think it's small. We need to be thinking big. You need to be thinking big, You need to be thinking big, Think big, I mean, I got to go. I can't keep giving...
Birds of a feather do not flock together. I don't do what no doing. I do me.
Listen, there's heartless, and then there's sleeping next to your dead boyfriend for a week level heartless. This woman had the whole world fooled, posting about Jesus on Facebook while a corpse rotted in her bedroom. When that 15-year-old boy found his daddy's body after 6 days, she was probably at work acting like nothing happened. The level of cold-blooded crazy we're dealing with here. Y'all not ready? I'm talking about 37-year-old Vianita Lennon, and what she did to Jason Bloomfield is the type of calculated evil that'll have you side-eyeing everybody you think you know. So if you've ever felt something off about someone that turned out to be dead on accurate, drop that story in the comments. Because this case right here, it's about to validate every gut feeling you've ever ignored. Now let me tell you about Jason Bloomfield, because this man deserves so much more than the hand he got dealt. At 46 years old, Jason wasn't out here asking for the world, just trying to live right and take care of his people. He had his job at Burger King down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and y'all, when I say this man was dependable, I mean dependable. The kind of employee managers write recommendation letters about. If Jason was supposed to clock in, he was there. If he couldn't make it, he called ahead with respect. That's just who he was. This man lived and breathed Miami Dolphins football. Win or lose, and let's be honest, they lost a lot now. That was his team and he rode with them no matter what. It was one of those pure joys that could light up his whole face, you know? The simple kind of happiness that didn't cost nothing but meant everything. But what really made Jason who he was? His family. Jason had a 15-year-old son who was his whole heart walking around outside his body. Everything this man did, every decision he made, that boy was at the center of it. And his mama? They stayed connected because that's what real family does. When Jason went quiet, when he didn't answer his phone, when he didn't show up somewhere he was supposed to be, people noticed, people cared. That's the type of man we lost to this evil. So when Jason started building a relationship with Vianita Lennon, it probably seemed normal enough at first. Two adults trying to make something work, sharing an apartment, splitting bills, doing what couples do. Sure, money was tight. They were facing eviction, stress was building up, but nothing that seemed worth killing over. But see, that's where we all got it wrong about who Vianita really was. Let me break down this Vianita character for y'all, because the red flags weren't just there. They were practically doing backflips trying to get somebody's attention.
McDonald's is hiring and their new starting pay is $31 an hour. Would you start working there?
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba, I'm working, bitch. Clocking in early.
Born in Detroit, and Detroit definitely breeds some tough people. But she'd been bouncing around Florida for years like a pinball. Miami-Dade, Broward County, moving from place to place like she was running from something or someone. At 4 feet 11 inches tall, she probably looked harmless to most folks. And that right there, that was her greatest weapon. Vianita wasn't some woman who just snapped one day under pressure. Oh no, this woman had a criminal record that read like a rap sheet highlight reel. Multiple arrests, convictions, the whole 9 yards. She wasn't making mistakes. Crime was literally her lifestyle choice. But if you scroll through her Facebook page, Lord have mercy, now she's Mother Teresa incarnate. Posting scriptures, talking about letting God fight her battles, sharing inspirational quotes about faith and family. To anybody looking at her social media, she appeared to be a reformed woman trying to walk the straight and narrow. But behind all those holy posts and Bible verses was someone drowning in financial chaos that was about to turn deadly. The money problems weren't just regular broke folk, they were about to be homeless. The kind of desperation that makes people consider options they never thought they'd consider. The stress of losing their apartment was crushing both of them, but it seemed to hit Vianita in a different way, like it activated something dark that was already lurking inside her. Now, according to what Vianita would later tell anybody who'd listen, Jason was stepping out on her with his problematic ex-girlfriend. She painted herself as the victim, the faithful woman betrayed by a man who couldn't keep it in his pants. Made it sound like she was the one getting hurt, the one being disrespected. But here's what's important to understand. Investigators would eventually prove this whole cheating narrative was nothing but lies designed to cover up murder. Jason and Vianita were still very much together when his life ended, still sharing that apartment, still sleeping in the same bed, still trying to figure out how to survive their money problems. But while Jason was probably thinking about picking up extra hours or finding a cheaper place to live, Vianita's mind had already traveled to a much darker destination. Her criminal background had taught her that rules were suggestions and consequences were for other people. Those Facebook posts about Satan getting busy and divine justice, they weren't random spiritual thoughts. They were the mindset of someone who was already planning something unforgivable. Moving on to November 23rd, 2024, because that date is forever burned into this tragedy. It started like any regular Thursday for Jason Bloomfield. He woke up that morning with no idea he was living through his final hours on this earth. Couldn't have imagined that the woman sleeping next to him, the woman he trusted enough to share bills and dreams with, was about to become his executioner. The day probably unfolded normal at first. Maybe Jason went to work, came home thinking about dinner or catching some TV. Perhaps he was texting with his son, making plans for the weekend, or talking to his mama about regular family stuff. Just ordinary life moments that ordinary people take for granted. But Vianita, her mind was somewhere else entirely, and Jason was about to find out just how far she was willing to go. That evening, right around dinner time, the neighbors in their Fort Lauderdale apartment complex heard something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. 6 gunshots. Not one shot that could have been an accident. Not 2 shots that might have been self-defense. 6 deliberate gunshots that shattered the quiet of what should have been just another Thursday night in Florida. Those neighbors heard Jason Bloomfield take his last breath and they didn't even know it. They probably thought it was fireworks going off early, or maybe a car backfiring, or somebody watching an action movie with the volume too high. But they had just witnessed a cold-blooded execution, and the killer was already planning her next move. Let me tell you what happened next, because this is where the story gets so twisted it'll make you question everything you think you know about human nature. The next morning, November 24th, something unprecedented happened at that Burger King where Jason worked faithfully. For the first time in all his years of reliable service, Jason Bloomfield was a no-show. His manager kept staring at that work schedule, then at the clock, probably thinking there had to be some kind of mistake. Jason was the type of employee who'd call if he was running even 5 minutes late. He had respect for people's time and took his job seriously, but not today. Today there was just silence where Jason's voice should have been. The manager tried calling Jason's phone, straight to voicemail, tried again an hour later, then again. Still nothing. By the end of what should have been Jason's shift, concern was turning into genuine worry. This wasn't like Jason at all, and everybody who knew this man could feel something was seriously wrong. But hey, while Jason's manager was pacing the floor with worry and his family was starting to panic, Vianita Lennon was out here putting on the performance of her life. When neighbors asked about those 6 gunshots they'd heard echoing through the building the night before, this woman looked them dead in their faces and said it was just a friend of hers who had fired some shots in the area. Just some random incident that had nothing to do with her or Jason. Said it as casually as discussing the weather forecast. And when Jason's family started calling, desperately trying to reach him, oh, so now the story changes completely. Vianita told them she and Jason had broken up because he was cheating with his problematic ex-girlfriend. Made herself sound like the heartbroken victim, like Jason had just walked out of her life without looking back. Different lies for different people, but always delivered with that same calm, collected voice. The apartment that used to have the sounds of normal life, Nia's television shows playing, conversations, footsteps moving around when dead silent. Neighbors who were used to hearing the regular sounds of people living their lives suddenly heard absolutely nothing. It was like the place had become a tomb, and girl, in the most literal sense it had. Now I need y'all to really prepare yourselves for what I'm about to tell you, because this is where Vianita's evil reaches levels that'll make you lose sleep. That Thursday night when Jason died, he wasn't killed in the bedroom where his family would eventually find him. The blood evidence showed he was shot right there in the living room, probably sitting on the couch watching TV or eating dinner, just minding his own business when Vianita decided to end his life. 6 shots fired into Jason's body while he was completely defenseless. Let me say that again. 6 bullets pumped into this man like his life meant absolutely nothing. This wasn't some heated argument that got out of hand. This wasn't self-defense. Jason was relaxing in his own home when his girlfriend turned into his executioner. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. After Jason collapsed and died right there in that living room, Vianita didn't call the police. She didn't panic and run. She didn't break down over what she'd done. No, this 4'11" woman looked at her boyfriend's dead body and started making calculated moves. She had to relocate Jason's corpse from the living room to the small bedroom, and y'all picture that scene for a minute. This tiny woman dragging a grown man's dead weight across the apartment floor, leaving a blood trail behind her. The physical effort it took, the complete emotional detachment required to treat someone you claim to love like a piece of furniture you're moving around. Then came the cleanup operation. Vianita got some Clorox bleach and rags and went to work scrubbing Jason's blood off those floors like she was cleaning up spilled juice. The smell of bleach trying to mask the smell of death. The methodical way she wiped down every surface, attempting to erase the evidence of her crime. But blood has a way of seeping into places you can't see, leaving traces that forensic investigators would discover later. After finishing her cleanup, she moved furniture to block the bedroom door where Jason's body was hidden. This wasn't panic behavior, y'all. This was strategic planning. She was creating barriers so that if anyone came to the apartment, they wouldn't accidentally discover her secret. And then meet us, and this is the part that'll really mess with your head. After murdering Jason, dragging his corpse around and scrubbing up his blood, Vianita went to bed. In the same apartment where Jason's body was beginning to decompose. Possibly in the same bed they used to share. How do you fall asleep knowing death is just a few feet away? How do you get comfortable when you've just committed the ultimate betrayal? What happened over the next 5 days is evil on a level that defies human understanding. While Jason's body was rotting in that bedroom, Vianita was living her absolute best fake life. November 24th, the morning after she murdered him, she woke up and got ready for work like it was any other Friday. Showered, got dressed, probably hummed a little tune while she prepared for her day. Meanwhile, Jason's corpse was starting its decomposition process just down the hallway. She went to work that morning and clocked in like nothing had happened. Talked to coworkers, probably complained about regular job stuff, maybe even laughed at someone's jokes. How was your evening, Vianita? Her colleagues might have asked. Same old, she probably replied, knowing damn well she'd just committed murder less than 24 hours earlier. But that's not even the most twisted part. While Vianita was at work playing innocent, Jason's manager at Burger King was having a complete meltdown. This man who'd never missed work without calling was suddenly a ghost. The manager kept dialing Jason's number and every single call went straight to voicemail. The worry was eating him alive, but Vianita, she was probably discussing weekend plans with her work friends. When Jason's family started blowing up his phone, desperate to hear his voice, this woman had her story ready. She told them with a completely straight face that she and Jason had broken up because he was cheating with his ex. Made herself sound like the wounded party, like she was the one dealing with heartbreak. He left me for that problematic woman, she said, knowing Jason's body was decomposing in their shared apartment. Can you imagine the manipulation? Jason's mama was worried sick about her son, calling everyone she could think of trying to locate him. His 15-year-old boy was texting and calling, wondering why his daddy wasn't responding. And Vianita was feeding them lies, making them believe Jason had just abandoned his family for another woman. But this woman wasn't just lying, she was stealing too. Vianita had access to Jason's phone and she used it to get into his bank accounts. She started making Zelle transfers to herself, literally robbing a dead man. Think about the coldness that requires. Your boyfriend's corpse is rotting in the next room and you're stealing his money like it's yours now. These weren't desperate one-time transactions either. The transfers happened over multiple days. She was systematically draining Jason's accounts while his body was decomposing, while his family was frantically searching for him, while his son was crying himself to sleep wondering where his daddy was. And y'all, she was still posting on Facebook during this time. Remember that post about Satan getting busy and letting God handle her enemies? She wrote that while Jason's dead body was literally rotting in her bedroom, sharing scriptures about divine justice and being God's anointed child, all while living with the evidence of her own demonic actions. Every single night for 5 days, Vianita came home to that apartment knowing Jason was dead in the bedroom. Every morning she woke up to the smell of death and got ready for another day of lies. She drove around town in Jason's silver BMW like it belonged to her now. Went to work, ran errands, lived her life while Jason's family was losing their minds with worry. The neighbors kept asking about those gunshots they'd heard. Oh, that was just some friend of mine, she'd say with a shrug. Like 6 shots fired in an apartment building was just another Tuesday night. The level of audacity was absolutely breathtaking. Moving on to November 29th, because 5 whole days had passed since those gunshots shattered the quiet. 5 days of Vianita's lies, 5 days of Jason's family slowly going insane with worry. 5 days of his body decomposing while his killer walked around free as a bird. Jason's 15-year-old son and his grandmother couldn't take the silence anymore. They'd been calling everyone, checking everywhere, and nobody had seen Jason anywhere. This wasn't like him at all. Jason stayed connected to his family. If something was wrong, if he needed space, if he was going somewhere, he would have said something. So they made the decision that would change their lives forever. They were going to that apartment to check on Jason themselves. They got to that apartment building, walked up those stairs and stood in front of that door, probably knocked a few times. Jason, you in there? It's us. Open up. Nothing but silence. Called out his name louder. Maybe tried calling his phone one more time. Still nothing. Finally, they used their key to get inside. The smell hit them first. Y'all, anyone who's ever encountered death knows that smell. Sweet, sickening, something that gets into your nose and never really leaves. You never forget it once you've experienced it. But they probably didn't recognize it right away. Maybe thought something had spoiled in the refrigerator, or there was a plumbing issue, or the trash needed to be taken out. Then they found him. Jason Bloomfield's body was in that small bedroom, and after 5 days in Florida's heat and humidity, decomposition had already taken hold. But imagine being that 15-year-old boy. Picture walking into a room looking for your father and discovering his corpse instead. The scream that probably tore from his throat. The way his grandmother probably tried to shield him from the sight while her hands shook dialing 911. That 911 call was probably one of the most heartbreaking dispatchers had ever received. A family member finding their loved one dead is devastating enough, but finding them like this, after days of wondering, after days of worry and fear and calling everyone they knew, it's the kind of trauma that marks a person's soul forever. Within minutes, police cars and ambulances were racing toward that Fort Lauderdale apartment. Crime scene investigators got the call. The medical examiner was notified. What had started as family members checking on their loved one had just become a homicide investigation. But here's what makes this story even more twisted. While Jason's son and grandmother were discovering his body and calling for help, while they were probably holding each other and trying to process the horror they'd just witnessed, Vianita Lennon was out there somewhere thinking she'd actually gotten away with murder. And then, like something out of a bad movie, something incredible happened. Vianita pulled into that apartment complex parking lot driving Jason's silver BMW. Let that marinate for a minute. She rolled up to the scene where Jason's body had just been discovered, driving her dead boyfriend's car. The absolute audacity was mind-blowing. But what happened next? Oh, so now she wants to be an actress. The moment Vianita saw those police cars and ambulances, she immediately started wailing and carrying on about how devastated she was to learn about Jason's death, making all kinds of noise about her broken heart and her shock. But there was just one problem. The police officer watching her performance wrote something very specific in his report. He noted that Vianita was crying with no actual tears. She was making all the sounds of someone whose world had just collapsed, but her eyes were bone dry. This wasn't grief, y'all. This was a terrible performance, and the police officers weren't buying tickets to this show. Real heartbreak doesn't look like a stage production. Real tears don't turn on and off like a light switch. While Vianita was busy with her fake breakdown, detectives were already starting to unravel her web of lies. And let me tell you something. These investigators had seen enough crime scenes to recognize when someone was trying to play them. Every single story this woman had told was about to be exposed as pure fiction. First, they talked to the neighbors who'd heard those 6 gunshots on November 23rd. Remember how Vianita claimed it was just some friend who fired shots in the area? Well, detectives pulled the records. No reports of gunshots anywhere in that neighborhood that night. No police calls about shooting incidents. No other neighbors heard anything except from this one apartment building. Her story was complete lies, and now everyone knew it. Then there was that elaborate story she'd been telling Jason's family about them breaking up because he was cheating. But if they'd broken up days earlier like she claimed, why was she still living in the apartment? Why was she driving his car? Why was all his stuff still there? Why hadn't anyone else heard about this dramatic breakup and move out? The lies were so obvious they were practically insulting people's intelligence. But technology doesn't lie, and that's where Vianita really sealed her own fate. In 2024, your phone basically tells your whole life story whether you want it to or not. When detectives pulled her cell phone records and GPS data, what they found was absolutely devastating to her case. Her phone showed she was right there in that apartment on November 23rd when those gunshots were fired. Not visiting a friend nearby, not somewhere else entirely when the murder happened. She was right there at the exact location at the precise time Jason died. The GPS coordinates placed her at the scene of the crime during the commission of the crime. Make that make sense, Vianita. But that wasn't even the most damning evidence. Detectives discovered that after Jason was murdered, this woman had been using his phone like it was hers. She'd accessed his bank accounts, made multiple Zelle transfers to herself, essentially treating his money like it had become her inheritance. Think about the coldness that requires your boyfriend's corpse is decomposing in the next room, and you're robbing his bank account. This wasn't desperation or survival, these transfers happened over several days. She was methodically stealing from Jason while his body was rotting. The crime scene reconstruction painted an even clearer picture of what really happened. Jason hadn't died in that bedroom where his family tragically found him. The blood spatter evidence showed he'd been shot multiple times in the living room, probably just sitting there relaxing after work when Vianita decided to execute him. 6 gunshots fired in that living room. Then this woman had single-handedly dragged his body across the apartment floor, leaving a blood trail that she attempted to clean but couldn't completely erase. A 4'11" woman moving a grown man's dead weight like he was furniture she was rearranging. The investigators found evidence of all this: blood patterns, drag marks, signs that someone had tried to scrub away the carnage but failed. The phone records also revealed something that made even seasoned detectives sick to their stomachs. While Jason's family was frantically calling and texting him, desperate for any sign of life, Vianita was reading every single message. She was watching his mother panic. She was seeing his teenage son's heartbroken texts asking where his daddy was. And she did absolutely nothing. She let them suffer in agony for 5 solid days, knowing exactly where Jason was and exactly what had happened to him. The GPS tracking showed that during those 5 nightmarish days, Vianita had left the apartment multiple times, gone to work, run errands, driven around Fort Lauderdale in Jason's car like she owned it, all while his body was decomposing in their shared bedroom, all while his family was losing their minds with worry and fear. And that Facebook post about Satan getting busy and letting God handle her enemies, she typed that while Jason's corpse was literally rotting 10 feet away from her. Posting about divine justice and being an anointed child of God, all while living with the physical evidence of her own evil actions. Every single lie was crumbling like a house of cards. Every story was being exposed as complete fiction. The evidence was so overwhelming that even Vianita had to know her crocodile tears weren't going to save her from what was coming. The investigation took several months, but detectives were building a case so airtight that Vianita's lies couldn't find any cracks to slip through. Every piece of evidence pointed directly at her. Every attempt to cover up her crime had failed spectacularly. The GPS data, the phone records, the blood evidence, the financial theft. It all painted a crystal clear picture of a cold-blooded killer who thought she was smarter than everyone else. On May 2, 2025, justice finally caught up with Vianita Lennon. A patrol officer in Fort Lauderdale spotted her and took her into custody based on an active warrant. After months of walking around free while Jason's family grieved, after months of thinking she'd actually gotten away with murder, her time was up. But the legal system wasn't finished with her yet. When prosecutors examined Vianita's extensive criminal history, they saw a clear pattern that went far beyond this single murder. On May 5th, they filed what's called a career criminal felony case against her. This wasn't just about Jason's murder anymore. This was about a woman who had made crime her full-time occupation, and the justice system was finally ready to hold her accountable for everything. The charges were as serious as they come: the murder with a firearm and using a deceased person's personal information to commit fraud. That second charge stemmed from her stealing Jason's money after she killed him, literally adding insult to the ultimate injury. She didn't just take his life, she robbed his corpse too. On May 28th, Vianita stood before a judge for her arraignment. This was her opportunity to admit what she'd done, to show some tiny shred of remorse for destroying Jason's family and ending an innocent man's life. Instead, even with overwhelming evidence stacked against her, even with her web of lies completely unraveled, this woman had the unmitigated audacity to plead not guilty to all charges. She was still trying to manipulate the system, still pretending to be the victim instead of the monster, still acting like somehow, some way she could convince people that mountains of evidence were wrong and she was innocent. The judge saw right through her performance. Bond was denied, which meant Vianita would remain locked up at the Paul Ryan detention facility in Pompano Beach while awaiting trial. As of this moment, she's still sitting in that cell, still claiming innocence, still refusing to take responsibility for the brutal, calculated murder of Jason Bloomfield. But here's the reality. The evidence speaks louder than lies ever will. GPS data doesn't lie. Phone records don't lie. Blood spatter patterns don't lie. And Jason's decomposing body in that bedroom, that definitely didn't lie. Vianita can play the victim all she wants, but the truth is written in technology, forensic science, and the testimony of everyone whose lives she tried to manipulate with her endless deception. Y'all, Jason Bloomfield should be alive right now. He should be at work today making sure those orders are correct at Burger King. He should be texting with his son about weekend plans, maybe watching his Miami Dolphins play and talking smack when they make a good play. He should be calling his mama, checking on extended family, just living the honest, simple life he'd worked so hard to build. Instead, he's gone because the woman he trusted decided his life was worth less than her twisted convenience. Because someone with a criminal past and a heart full of darkness saw him as an obstacle instead of a human being. Because red flags that should have been screaming alarms got overlooked until it was far too late. This case teaches us that evil can hide behind scripture quotes and fake religious posts. It shows us that financial stress can turn deadly when it meets the wrong type of person. Most importantly, it reminds us that we all have a responsibility to look out for each other and trust our instincts when something feels off. If you're in a relationship where money problems are creating constant tension and drama, get help before it escalates. If your partner has a criminal history and starts acting desperate or unpredictable, don't ignore those warning signs. If someone you know keeps changing their story about important situations, ask the hard questions and demand real answers. If you're a neighbor who hears suspicious sounds in the middle of the night, don't assume it's nothing. Call the police and let them investigate. If you're a coworker who notices someone missing work without any explanation, speak up to management. If you're a family member getting strange explanations for why you can't reach your loved one, trust those gut feelings that something's seriously wrong. Because Jason's 15-year-old son will carry the trauma of discovering his father's decomposing body for the rest of his life. His grandmother will never be able to forget that smell, that horrific sight, that moment when their entire world collapsed. Vianita Lennon didn't just murder Jason, she destroyed a whole family's sense of safety, trust, and peace. But we can honor Jason's memory by learning from this nightmare.
Nothing makes me scared. Do you see my hands? Do they look like they're shaking to you?
Don't make me give you back. I say,
No.
bounce that shit.